Welcome to Lean Stories. Today's guest is Noah Fichter. So, full disclosure, he's my son Max's close friend since high school, and he was Max's best man at his recent wedding, amazingly enough. So, I've watched him grow as a builder from closer than most. And what's always stood out is his instinct: build first, learn from your customers, and iterate as you go. That's that instinct. That's exactly what Lean Startup Co. exists to teach. So if you're leading innovation inside an organization and you're not quite sure whether your system is really working, we run an innovation system audit across multiple dimensions and give you an honest external read with clear recommendations on what to fix first. So 2 to 3 weeks, no commitment beyond that. There's a link in the show notes to find out more. So let's jump in. Welcome to Lean Stories, Noah. Most founders say that they start thinking like an entrepreneur in college, sometimes in a class, a hackathon, maybe they meet a mentor. We're going to speak today to Noah Fichter, who started in high school, started building bots, not for fun, but to solve a real problem for real users that people actually paid for. So we're going to hear about that and how that experience shaped everything about how he builds today, how he's applying that same instinct to an overlooked problem in education. It's not about the sexy stuff. It's about the manual, fragmented, high-stakes work that keeps school administrators up at night. And so we'll hear about how Noah has turned that into an automated pipeline with Scout. So this is Noah's Lean story. So welcome, Noah. Great to be speaking with you.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Before you got to Scout, before you started running your current startup, you were building things in high school. So tell us a little bit about that journey, how you got there, and how that informed where you are today.
Yeah, so when I was in high school, my parents had a very strict rule for me, which was they would not give me money for anything kind of superfluous, like video games, clothes, or, like fancy clothes, that kind of thing. It was only necessities, food, toiletries, basic clothes. And they wanted me to kind of learn the hard work that it takes to earn these things. And I really wanted to play video games. I loved playing video games. And so I was like, I need to make some money. I need to figure out some way to make some money. And some of my friends in high school, Max included, were reselling sneakers that they were buying on the internet. They would sell out really quickly. A lot of people wanted them. And so you could make some money if you got one of those pairs before they sold out within a couple minutes. And I realized pretty quickly that this process of clicking all these buttons to add a product to the cart and then enter all of your payment details and then check out was something that could be automated and that people were kind of exploring automating. And, Max and I were both kind of learning how to code at that time and started exploring it together, actually, figuring out, how could we write a program that will kind of do all of this for us. And that was how we ended up buying a lot of pairs of sneakers and eventually, making a decent amount of money off of it. And then eventually kind of turning that into a bot that other people could, pay us for to use as opposed to just us using it ourselves.
So how did you go from thinking maybe there's a little bit of a problem here to really understanding there was a genuine problem and people might actually pay to solve it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was just a desire in the community of people who bought shoes and were, interested in buying shoes, whether it was for themselves or, to make money off of, to get these pairs of shoes that they were really excited about. And there was just this constant battle of like, this shoe is coming out, I really want to buy it, and I don't have access to it. And when we realized like we were getting access to these pairs that other people weren't able to get access to, people who really wanted them, I realized that we could give them access to this product that, they would pay a small kind of monthly license fee to be able to get access to any pair of sneakers or any piece of clothing that they were really interested in owning.
Yeah. What was getting that first customer to actually pay for it? Well, what did that feel like? What was that emotion going through at that time?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of pent up excitement about the product. I had learned a lot about marketing from other people who were doing this, kind of selling their own sneaker bots or bots for different websites. That there were just a lot of people who wanted a program that would buy this stuff for them. And so by the time I was ready to actually sell it, I had people who had kind of signed up for a wait list who were waiting for the moment that they could go in and buy my own kind of limited release of the bot itself, of the licenses for it. So definitely like a very, I don't know, it was a very like magical kind of thrilling moment to like open the floodgates essentially.
When in that sequence did you get to a point where you said, okay, I'm gonna keep building. Like this might be my first thing. This might be but this is for me. This is like I found my calling.
I think that there was a moment between high school and college, or maybe at the beginning, first semester of, freshman year of college, where I realized college felt a lot easier to me than high school. High school, I was getting up at 5 a.m., going to maybe work out before school started, end at 3. I have track practice. I have to go home. I have to do homework. I'm up until 1 a.m. In college, I felt like there was much more downtime, and I felt almost like I didn't know what to do with that downtime. And the coding piece was really, it was just like fun for me. I was just enjoying, building stuff. And I think like that first semester of college, because I had all that free time, I really, started to figure out how can I turn this into something real, as opposed to just like a program that I'm building for myself for fun.
Right. And so what's your big takeaway in terms of how you think about how you operate now? Like what was a key learning that you got, about understanding customers or testing your way forward? Like what's something that you still feel like, yeah, this came from that moment, this came from that time?
Yeah, I mean, it was like launch early and launch often, and then iterate really quickly on the piece of software itself. I remember releasing it and nothing worked, and people were so excited to buy it, and then nothing worked, and people were so angry. But they were like bought into this vision of this program that was going to help them, whether it was buy a lot of pairs or buy this one piece of clothing they really wanted. And so they were really like bought into working with me on it. And as soon as it didn't work, they would tell me everything that was wrong. And then I would be up every night, all week, stay up the night before a release and try to fix all of those things and make sure that it would work the next time. And every time it would work a little bit better. And that's very much like how I operated with everything that I've done since then, is just like get this into the hands of real people and get
Yeah.
them to tell you what they absolutely hate about it so that you can make it better.
Yeah, I mean, people willing to actually share like that emotional response, like this is terrible. Like the fact that they would share that with you rather than just turn it off and never come back to you. That's a signal, right? That's an important thing to feed off of.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like that's how in everything I've done since then, that's how I've kind of invalidated things, is that if nobody is willing to tell me what they hate about this thing, about this feature, about this product, then they don't care about it enough. They don't care about the problem enough for me to keep working on this thing. Making it look a little nicer or adding a bunch of features isn't going to, move the needle on them actually caring about the problem.
Let's fast forward the tape a little bit, right? So, at some point, you go through college, right? You've had an awesome time, right? And then you start working outside of your bot activity. You were doing something else, and you were learning, and you were coding. Tell us about there, and how did that experience inform your understanding of who customers are and iterating? What did you take away from that period in your life?
Yeah, so after college, I worked at Slash, which is a fintech startup. I joined them as the first, second-ish engineer. And they had just finished YC, and so they were in this period of massive growth. Everything was breaking. All of the code had been written by the CTO, and it was all like really shoddy. The platform looked really bad. It didn't work very well. But people loved it. It was solving this very real problem for them. And I spent 3 years there, and again, just like learned, like really like drilled into my head this philosophy of just like get things out there, get them into the hands of our users. We had customers who were solo entrepreneurs who were spending $100 a month, up to customers who were these, small businesses, very high spend businesses who were spending millions of dollars a month. and the needs of every type of customer was very different. And so one thing that we really had to kind of figure out was like, how do we solve for this like scale and this difference between all of the different customers, which was something that I had never really done it. I was operating at a very small scale, and the company just kind of kept growing and growing, and we had all these different types of customers, and really just learning how to, you know, run an engineering team, or, work with an engineering team of 10, 20 people who are all trying to solve all of these different problems in the same kind of problem space. That was, what I really took away from that experience.
And were you starting to apply like process to the work here? Were you starting to get like a consistent method for how to learn from the customers?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the method, there wasn't so much process around it as it was just like talking to them all the time. We had, usually it was Slack channels. Like we would have a shared Slack between us and pretty much every one of our big customers. And then we had, support tickets for the smaller customers. Sometimes it was like a text message chain or a WhatsApp chain. But it was just like hearing constant feedback and then iterating on that feedback. And sometimes the feedback is like, this thing is broken, this isn't working. And that's a big, for fintech particularly, everything needs to be very stable and very scalable. But part of it was like, you would hear kind of rumblings of, I have this other problem in my business that is slightly related to this problem. How can we kind of build something new and novel that nobody is solving to solve that problem, to increase the value that we're kind of delivering to that customer?
That sounds like, and I know your role as an engineer, it sounds like engineers were listening to the customers just as much as any other function. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the expectation was that engineers were almost like the first line of defense. We had a support team. It varied in size over different periods of time, but particularly for the big customers, we were in contact with them directly, and not in a support capacity, but in a like, how does this inform our engineering roadmap capacity?
Was there a reluctance across the team? So, you were early in. Sounds like you built up a bigger team over time. Was there a reluctance from the people who were writing the code to pause and try and learn from the customers? That was like, I just want to get building rather than listening, or like, how did you manage that?
I think different engineers have a different amount of affinity towards talking to customers, but on the whole, it was kind of an expectation. Even if you were just like, I want to get to building, like whatever you are getting to building, there's no point in building it unless you have an understanding of what the customer actually needs out of this feature. Like we didn't have a design team whose job it was to do user research, or product managers whose job it was to figure out, like, to scope out all of the tickets. It was like, if you think that this thing is really important, that it needs to be built, that it's going to deliver value to our customers, then you need to be able to articulate why that is. And the only way you're going to be able to articulate why is if you talk to the customers and really understand it.
Yeah. Was there a kind of a seminal moment in that slash story where you learned something from the customer, like that really informed either a pivot or some kind of important progress that you made as a team?
Yeah, I mean, we had a big pivot a couple years in. We actually made a huge mistake early on. So we started out kind of the synergy, the thing that got me in the door with Slash was that early on we were serving these kind of sneaker resellers, helping them get virtual cards for their sneaker bots. And after a while, we started realizing like we needed to serve a larger market. And the way that we thought that we were going to do that was by offering our existing customer base more value, like giving them a personal account instead of just the business account, and having them kind of manage all of their finances in this one place. And we spent a really long time building this without really validating it. And then we released it. It was this huge thing, and it totally flopped. And I think after that, that was like the seminal moment where we realized like we need to really recalibrate and go back to the roots of like, our job is to discover and solve pain, and not to just like come up with these things that we think could be cool or could be valuable. Like we need to figure out first what is the pain, and then what can we do? How can we build software that solves that pain? And then, for the next 2 years after that, that was the only thing we did.
Sounds like there was like a let's all get together and stare at this problem and realize we need a new approach to how we're operating. Was that how it actually played out?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was like we sat down together and like reflected on it. I think it was just like it was kind of a moment of crisis for us where we were like, this isn't we didn't do the right thing here. We didn't build a company that the way that you're meant to build a company. Like we're not just going to create growth out of thin air by coming up with random things. And I think the founders, particularly who had gone through YC, who had realized like we hadn't really followed this YC method of like discover the pain, talk to your users, and then just iterate and build the next thing. Really like kind of brought us back to those roots of that's how we need to operate from here.
Yeah. All right. So the good segue into talking about Y Combinator and the journey that you guys have been on. So before you got to YC, you were searching for an opportunity. Talk about that journey, and tell us about how you eventually got to a place that was an opportunity that was kind of worthy of getting into or even applying to YC for.
I mean, I think that I always had this itch to go work in education. I got my second degree after computer science in education policy. I thought, maybe I'll go be a teacher at some point, make some money in tech, and then go be a teacher. And then, of course, like realized I loved building way too much, and I was never going to go do that. But I did. I remember, my interview with the founders of Slash. They were like, "What would you do if not this?" And I told them I would start an ed tech company. And eventually realized like it was time for me to do that. And so that was when I went to Max and I asked him like, would you start a company with me in education? I have no idea what it'll be. I just want to do something in this space that I really care deeply about. And we spent a long time on nights and weekends really searching for what the right thing was. And we talked to tons of teachers and administrators, and we built prototypes, and sometimes we spent too long on prototypes and spent too much time on the wrong thing. I think it's something that Max is really exceptional at, is like telling me when I'm wasting my time on things that don't actually matter to the customer. So we spent all this time just like searching through the idea maze or the problem space of like, what is an actually important problem here? And every time we would kind of come up with the solution, present it to the world, and the world wouldn't care. And that's how we knew that this was the wrong problem. And then there was one moment where, so eventually, we had gone from like lesson planning to maybe some like data analytics to plugging into all of your different sources where your different students are working. And eventually, we were blasting emails to every school in the country. We had no idea who our target market was. We were just like, all K-12 schools, that's our market. And this one school responded and was like, actually, I might be interested in seeing a demo for this kind of data analytics product that sits on top of all your different systems. And we spoke to them and we showed them a demo, and they were like, yeah, we actually don't really care about the data analytics. We just have this problem. All of our students are online. Our teachers only see them once a month, and they've got students in 50 different online platforms, and they just have no idea what their students are doing without logging into all of these platforms. And it was something that we had kind of heard before. It was what kind of had driven us to this place, was that teachers say often, like, I wish all my tools talked to each other. But this was the first time that we heard that really like deep pain. It was like, we cannot operate our school without figuring out a new way to track what our students are actually doing when they're working online. They're working at home. We don't see them very often. And that was the moment that we realized, like, this is the problem that we need to solve. This is the problem that fits us really well. And, we applied to YC with that. We had actually applied with a previous idea, and they were like, guys, we love you guys, but like, we would love to fund you, but this is a horrible idea. Come back when you have a better idea. They wanted us to pivot out of education entirely, and we just like we wanted to keep going because we knew there was a deep, painful problem there. We just needed to keep going to find it. And that was kind of the moment when that school responded and we could hear the pain when they were talking
Hmm.
about that problem. That was the moment when we realized, like, this is the idea.
How did you sustain that enthusiasm for searching for the idea, right? Like it was not a couple of weeks, right? It was quite a long period of time of banging your head against the wall and struggling to find the teachers that you just described and trying to find the pain points. How did you keep yourselves going to say it's still worth pursuing this? It's still worth pushing to the next idea and iterating and throwing another idea against the wall. What was how did that play out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a mixture of just like deep love for the problem space, deep love for the customers. We like this is the thing that we wanted to do with our lives. Like do work, good work in education through software. And if we give up now, like what are we going to go do? We're going to go work, go back to our old jobs or work something else that, work somewhere else that wasn't like we had this itch for a reason, right? So part of it was like, we're just going to keep going until this works. And I think part of it was the kind of irrational optimism that if we kept going and if we kept kind of tweaking our strategy or the problem space or keep, figuring out where the slightly deeper pain is, peeling back layers of the onion, then eventually we will stumble on that really deep and painful problem. And I think it was also just like fun. We made it fun. Like we would work on the weekends. I was living in DC at the time, but I would come to New York some weekends and spend time with Max. And he and I stayed friends throughout college, and we had a long distance relationship for a while. So just like making it not feel like this horrible slog that we were pushing through, but just like this side project that we were having a lot of fun doing, and we were gonna just like keep going because it was a fun way to spend our weekends.
How have you managed to make that shift from this is fun and we're having a good time here and I'm working with my best friend and this is cool on nights and weekends to now like we're actually doing this, right? Like how have you managed to translate that passion for the problem into motivating you to build a business around it?
I mean, it's definitely been a shift. Even through YC, it was such a good time. Max and I were living together in San Francisco, and we would get up at 7 and work until 2 and play music all day. And, there's a lot of nostalgia for the good old days. But every moment in the company, it's interesting. It's like the shifts in operations, in process, in implementation, in sales, like all of these shifts happen gradually from a moment of like internal pain. Max and I have these weekly check-ins. We had one last night, and and we just talk about like things that aren't working in the company. We kind of go through this internal process of iteration where it's like this thing isn't working. What can we try to do a little bit differently to make it work better? And then we see we are the customers of that internal product, and we see, did this fix our problem? And so you can trace kind of every little change in the organization back to just like a decision to try to do something differently and then see whether or not that works. And so there's never one moment where it's like, this was when we became a real company. It's just like every day it looks a little bit differently. And then you look back 6 months or a year and you're like, wow, everything is so much different than it was back then.
Well, what's been a really powerful experiment that you had a lot of confidence with that you really thought was going to get you to kind of some step change that just totally bummed you guys out because it just didn't generate any of the value that you thought. Talk us through like how you got to design that and like what did that experiment show you?
Yeah, I remember there was a moment about a year ago, maybe a little bit less, maybe like last summer, where we were really feeling like I was doing too much engineering work and neglecting sales. And, my background is in engineering. I love coding. I didn't want to be the salesperson. I didn't want to like let go of this thing that I love doing so much. And so but we realized that there was this real bottleneck that we had to solve. There were opportunities for growth that we weren't capitalizing on because I wasn't spending my hours, tackling that. And we made this decision to basically split responsibility between new customers is my responsibility and existing customers, whether it's people piloting or implementing or fully live, are Max's responsibility and his team's responsibility. And in some ways it worked. In some ways we definitely focused on growth. It definitely helped. And in some ways this like sharp disconnect, these very clear lines, which engineers love. They love to set very clear expectations. It created new problems, right? And so we ended up kind of keeping this overall structure in that, I kind of like lead the sales team, which is me and one other person now. And Max still leads the implementation team, the pilot team, the engineering team, which are all the same engineers doing all of those things. But we definitely like had to tweak things about that new process over time. And there's much more of kind of like an overlap period where like particularly during pilots we are both really heavily involved because it's still part of the sales process, but it's also part of the implementation and the engineering and like customer retention process. So I think it's, we have a lot of moments where it's like two steps forward, one step back, but eventually we take that one step forward again.
If someone's listening and they're building in a complex, a regulated space, whether that's healthcare, ed tech, finance, whether they're in a startup or they're in a large corporate environment, what's the thing that you would want to tell them about, how to find that real problem underneath the kind of the surface? Like, how would you guide them to start going about that?
Yeah, I think you really have to fall in love with the customers and not with the problem. I think a lot of people get fixated on like, I want to solve this specific problem, as opposed to just like, I want to start a business that solves problems for this type of person or for this person who is doing this thing. And if you shift your mindset to that, then you can end up solving a lot of problems. You can end up going really deep on one problem that you discover is really, really painful. Or you can say, I fell in love with this group of people who have 50 different problems and I want to solve all of them. And that's kind of like the more vertical play. But I think like it's much harder to go in and be like, I noticed this one problem. I'm going to just like bang my head against the wall until I solve it, because you might think it's a really big problem, but the customers just like don't care enough. It's not one of their top 5, top 3 priorities. And people just like don't change their behaviors unless you are solving a problem for one of their top 3 priorities. So that is the advice that I legitimately, the advice word for word that I give to every ed tech founder who comes to me like, how are you guys growing? It's like, just like solve their problems. Don't solve this specific problem if it's not working.
Yeah, love it. Where can people find out more about either the company or about any writing you're doing or talking about your process and your work?
Yeah, mostly we post updates on my LinkedIn. Sometimes I post on X or Twitter or whatever you call it. That's more like personal thoughts on the state of the world. But those are the 2 places that I'm most active.
All right. Well, we'll add a link to both of those in the notes below. So, Noah, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you. Thanks, and awesome to see the progress that you guys have made, and keep that going.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So that was a great episode. And Noah said something that really stopped me. If nobody is willing to tell you what they hate about your product, they probably don't care enough about the problem. That's your signal to stop. Most teams never run that test, and they should. If you're leading innovation and you want an honest read on where your system actually stands, we run an innovation system audit across 5 different dimensions with clear recommendations on what to fix first. 2 to 3 weeks, no commitment beyond that. There's a link in the show notes. I'll see you on the next episode.